Hello, everyone, and welcome to another in our series of interviews for the FLT Mag, which is a publication of IALLT. I'm Jeff Samuels, and I'll be our host again for this conversation. I've got three guests today, and we're going to be discussing HyFlex, which for our definition is essentially a modality in which there is either the simultaneous aspect of being in person and distributed or distance, or it could be sequential, or it could be sort of a fluctuation back and forth. It may be synchronous, it may be asynchronous, but essentially what we're going to talk about today are people's experiences having to do both of these in with the same population of students. So I'm going to ask my guests to, in turn, introduce themselves, talk a little bit about their professional background and what they teach and where they teach. And then we'll get into the discussion about HyFlex. Okay, so Luis, would you like to go first?
Sure. Thank you for the invitation. So I'm Luis Deocares, and I am the president of WATFL, the Greater Washington Association in DC for language teachers. And I also teach Spanish at the National Cathedral School in Washington, D.C., which is an independent school in D.C.
Okay, great. Shirley, how would you like to go next? And then we'll do Susan.
Okay, I'm Shirley Hall, and I am a Latin teacher, and I teach at Ocean Lakes High School in Virginia Beach, Virginia. So yeah, that's me.
Great.
All right, great. Thank you for the invitation as well, and nice to meet you all. My name's Susan Berry, and I am an ESOL teacher working at the Center for English Language Orientation Program, which is CLAP, and we're at Boston University in Boston, Massachusetts. And I mostly teach English for academic purposes and preparation.
Okay, great. So good variety. We've got K through 12, we've got higher ed, we've got world languages and English as a second language, which is very much the same as world languages. For non-native speakers of English, it is world languages. So let's get into a little bit about what your experience with HyFlex, particularly what classes you converted or had to be retrofitted to fit this modality, and were any of them designed to be HyFlex from the outset, or did you have to pivot? So let's start with Susan, and we'll just kind of go around.
Okay, great. I have taught HyFlex classes. They're called Learn From Anywhere here at BU. And one of them was for English for entrepreneurs and leadership and innovation. So it was a English for special purposes, where I had 5 Kazakh students from the same university, and then 3 that were Zooming in from Korea and Japan. The second one I taught was a reading writing class, just normal core class, morning class. And the third was a listening speaking class that actually had 4 levels in it, from beginner to mid intermediate. They were all designed as HyFlex classes.
Okay, very good. Shirley, what was your experience?
So basically when COVID hit, we had to switch gears and basically go hybrid. So I had students in front of me and I had students at home, and they were doing remote learning. And so I had to take everything that I used to do and create new learning plans for them to be able to do similar things, because I couldn't, and then I had to figure out a way for my remote students to see what my in-person students got to see. And it was one of those experiences that I don't have to do as much now, but I still have an aspect of it because I still do distance learning with multiple high schools. And so even now I have to deal with my other high school that I don't get to see in person. We do a hybrid of some sort with them as well.
Wow, that's a lot. I can't wait till we get into the discussion of how you pull this off. Luis, what's your experience?
So I teach 7th and 8th grade students, but the school where I teach goes from 4th grade to 12th grade. And basically we have 3 different divisions. So one of them is the lower school where the younger students are from 4th grade to 6th grade. And I teach in the middle school, which is 7th and 8th graders. And then the upper school is the high school, which is students from 9th grade to 12th grade. So the school, of course, when you teach children, we normally teach them in person. That's the plan has been. And when we had to pivot, a word that many of us do not want to listen much again, the school designed different ways for us to do this, depending on the grade levels that we teach in the division. So because of the age of the students and the needs of each division, we had slightly different programs or ways to do this. So in the end, what we had to adjust to was being in the classroom while we also had students at home at the same time. At the beginning, most of it was just synchronic, like at the same time for most of the work. We did some adjustments with our schedule for that year in particular, and we had to do some changes to use some particular technology, and I guess then soon we'll talk about what did those changes involve. But that was basically what we had to do during that time when we had to do hybrid. And then the school year we started completely in person, and we don't have online students, and occasionally when we need to, we do asynchronous work.
Okay, great. So I'd like to focus a little bit on some of the well, I don't want to say nitty gritty, but some of the more detailed aspects. So let's start with training. So did you have any formal training, or were there resources that were provided for you guys in terms of either the nuts and bolts, the logistics, the technology, or the learning design, the best practices and proven research-based best practices for teaching in a HyFlex environment? So Susan, do you want to go first?
Sure. So at BU, we went fully remote for all of the classes. And then we at CLOP kept up with some of the, well, let me start it. We went fully remote. They taught us how to use Zoom. Then we went to the Learn from Anywhere HyFlex model, and they had some training on the technology that we would need, what with the speakers and the view for the full class, Blackboard view that we could do, like whiteboard view, or just the view like we're looking at now. And then the students would have to, that were in person, would have to be masked and use the microphones that were set up in the classroom. And we had to toggle with our audio settings somewhat. And so we learned the technology with that. And then BU moved on to being completely in person again, which I think was quite helpful because many of the teachers were uncomfortable with it. And I feel like as ESL teachers, we pivot a little more easily with new technology and include different apps and online tools more fluently, perhaps, than the professors. So we continue to try to include trainings on best practices for, with the idea that we had some students in countries in different time zones that were going to continue wanting to study with us. And so they benefited from the training that we could do and keep up with their classmates in a way that was as interactive as we could make it. So we continued even internally to do some trainings for each other on how to use HyFlex. So it was kind of a combination of us self-teaching, of us getting our colleagues at CLOP to teach each other, and then from BU itself when they knew that they needed to adjust for the pandemic.
Did you have someone who does tech support who was a learning management system specialist, or a multimedia specialist who could help you with the logistics of you mentioned the microphones and the sound, for example?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. Right at our school, we do have student workers, and then we have one person who is a little more trained and specialized in tech and education technology. And then we can also lean, especially with like using Blackboard, we can lean on Boston University's really huge IT department. So that was very helpful. The biggest drawback probably that we'll get to later was that we didn't have enough funding ourselves to really have the kind of microphones that we needed and the kind of technology and internet speed as well to support some of the HyFlex teaching we were trying to do.
Gotcha. Shirley, how does your experience compare?
So when we first started, I actually knew I was going to be doing a distance learning class prior to like having to dive into this HyFlex model. So we were given a program called Jigsaw, and I learned it and I loved it. And I actually was able to convince, once we were having to do like with remote students and face-to-face students, I was able to convince my district to let me allow me to use Jigsaw for all my other classes because I loved it so much. And so I was able to see all the students on the program, the ones in front of me, the ones that were at home learning all at the same time. And then the other nice thing is our district provide us like securely, which we could have another computer going to kind of monitor what students were actually doing. And so that was very helpful because then we could message the kid if they weren't on task. And so that was very beneficial. And for a couple of my classes, I had 2 classes happening at the exact same time. And so I had 5 monitors going in front of me. So it was quite, I felt like I was in a recording studio. But it was definitely couple going for one class, couple going for another class, and then you get another computer going for the monitoring, make sure that they're on task. It was fun.
Wow. And did you get support for this? I mean, no, you said you'd gotten support. What I mean is, did you get like technical assistance and that? Training?
I actually was able to figure it out on my own, and I was quite proud of myself. And then I also had like a video camera. Like I felt like I was in a recording studio because I had the microphones and everything. It was very high tech. And so I was able to kind of make it all happen all at the same time. It just took a little bit of maneuvering with where I positioned myself with all the monitors.
Wow, impressive. And I would tell you, you should join the Mid-Atlantic Association for Language Learning Technology, but you're our secretary, so you're already a member. So a seasoned
Yes.
technologist and educator. Great,
Yes.
great, thanks. So Luis, how does your experience compare?
Well, when we first went to completely online mode, remote learning, we called it. We have an academic technology and a technology department in the school that thought about and planned some of the things that we needed to do to prepare for it. So together with, of course, the administration, they first, as I mentioned before, decided on what would be a good schedule for the kids that we teach. So we had already done some work in the past to change our schedule to one that is more brain friendly. and that helped. So we kind of modified that schedule. Traditionally schedules in the past, the kids have every class every day almost, and that means that they have homework every day. And if you have math in the morning, you have math at the same period all day long and all year long. That's normally how it is. And when we changed the schedule, we followed the same idea, and our schedule looks more like these. It's a schedule that looks like different. The students see me several times a week, but at different times, and they don't see every class every single day. So we follow the same idea, but our schedule is like it's like a 7-day schedule, but we moved back into a 5-day schedule, but still with the same idea. Keeping that in mind, we also thought about what we needed in order for where do we put all the content, what learning management system we were going to use. And we, as a school, we use Blackboard, not Blackboard, but Blackboard. And that's what we had. We decided to just use what we have. And we just, with some guidance from our tech department, we decided on what visually it was going to look like. So, using the system, the bulletin board, where are we going to post things, what are children going to see? And the idea was that the cognitive load of the students was not too high, so that they were just seeing, not visually, they were not too overwhelmed, and that it was also consistent with all the classes, and that we didn't have too many systems and ways for the kids, for the students to just submit work, to turn in work. So we tried to keep it into no more than 3, because it's too many things, for the kids to handle, and to submit one kind of work for one class and one tool for another one, and then it could be very overwhelming. So we agreed on that. We agreed on visually, having only to like split the screen for everybody on our bulletin board, and where we post things. Visual things that are very basic, but we thought that were very important for the age group that we teach. And then we got training when we moved into the hybrid part, having students at home and in the classroom at the same time. For this whole thing, we had training. We have an academic technology specialist that focuses on mostly supporting teachers in the classroom and training, and they provided a platform in our management system for with tips and tools, and they recorded videos for the teachers and for the students, one-on-one time to meet with the specialists as well, so that if we needed help with something, that they could help us as well. And we try to focus mostly, of course, in the well-being of the students, their mental health, and try to make this transition more consistent again with the classes. So, for example, we try to, as language teachers as well, for example, we have to see what am I comfortable with right now? What do I know? We're not a Google school. We have Microsoft 365 that we use, and we try to use those things too. And then, depending on the needs that we had, then we kept adding a few more things. I was trying to be as comfortable as possible with staying with 1 or 2 or 3 of my tools that I normally use, and just like exploit them. For example, like Flipgrid, and then as some needs came, I started to use a couple of them. But that was something that most of us, I think, did. We tried to not get overwhelmed with too many things that were available there right then and now too. And when it comes to the things that we needed, for example, in my classroom in particular, for example, remember that we had constraints of how many of occupancy, how many students can be in a room following the health guidelines. So because of that, we had to do the hybrid mode, so that students could be at school at the same time with the ones that are in the classroom. So to do that, we made sure that, for example, every classroom had a camera, which was an iPad with a tripod. We had already in the middle school had in place a 1-to-1 iPad program, which made it a lot easier to transition, because the students had only one platform, with one operating system to deal with, and they all had cameras in front of them and iPads that they use. So that was fortunately a very easy transition that way. We didn't have to last minute come up with some solution. All the students had an iPad already to use at the middle school. And then we were also trained, for example, on how to use, the technology. Like, for example, we have these omnidirectional microphones that were very handy because that allow us on a tripod to hear the room at home. So students who were at home could actually, as you move as a teacher, the sound travels better on these microphones, and you can hear conversations in the classroom or the teacher moving, and the students can hear it at home. Same thing with the iPad in the classroom facing the students, apart from my own computer, so that that iPad was like a window to the classroom. And we even were offered the possibility of putting these lenses that you attach to your iPad, so that it would be a wide lens, so that they could see more students at a time. When it comes to interacting with students at home, they would be able to see that too. So, and again, videos and meetings one-on-one. And it's a tech ticket system that you have. If you have a question or a need quickly, you send an email, and then it gets assigned to the right person, and then you get help. So I think those things helped. Of course, it was very challenging to have students at home and in person at the same time, but little by little we learned to deal with those obstacles.
So, this past about 10 minutes of this interview, I think is ripe for anyone who's interested in what are best practices here. You guys have rattled off some amazing pointers. Luis, in particular, I was struck with the way that you all sat down and thought about the student experience and consistency, and you mentioned cognitive load right away. And all three of you seem to have really put the students at the center and thought through the experience. My question is, this is the kind of thing, as I had a background previously doing a lot of curriculum development, and most of what we did was online, and so the student experience was paramount and really in the front. And you had to think about the additional time and effort and what it would take to do it effectively, and for the learners to thrive as well as the faculty. So I'm just curious, and anyone can answer in any order really here. Just sort of jump in. But did this must have cost some additional time, taken some additional time and effort? How would you quantify that? Were you able to handle it? Was it overwhelming? Were you compensated for it? How did that work?
I guess I could start if you want.
Sure.
Basically, the time factor was so much more, because with 6 different levels trying to teach them, and trying to get the same level that I would have gotten from the students if they were all in person, is definitely, it took a lot more time. And then I didn't want to sacrifice like the fun aspects that I had when they were all in person. So then I had to really like think about, how do you take something that was so like everyone in the same room was able to do it, and now be able to have everyone in different locations be able to do it. And so I was able to take like my trade wars game that I play with my students, and able to, because it was so had tons of manipulatives to it, and then I had to really think it through on how to get the kids to be able to interact with one another with a activity like that, because it's one of the highlights for the kids every year, and I didn't want to sacrifice not being able to do it. So that in itself took hours and hours and hours just to do one activity. And then trying to take other things that I have done and trying to make it interactive for the students, and learning all these new tools like Jamboard, and some other programs that get the kids to interact with the language even more so. not only do I have to learn it quickly, and then times it by 6 to get it all out there.
Wow. Susan, any comments? Anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I actually, Shirley, you said a lot of the things. I don't really have that much to add, except for just the one piece that for me, you said it, and I think rings true for me, is this idea of trying to access the students when I was used to using manipulatives, and I'd have to figure out a way, how am I going to have students have where they move their bodies or they move, like the learning style aspect of how to appeal to students who don't just like this or respond to this kind of modality. On the other hand, I felt like when you mentioned, the Flipgrid and the Jamboard, I feel like the pandemic and this whole kind of modality and these shifts really helped push me to learn things that I may not have learned otherwise. And now they're indispensable in my classroom, no matter what, whether I have in-person people or remote people or both. So in that way, the pandemic had the benefit of really giving us all more tools in our toolbox to be able to access students who really like that kind of intermodality and like using a lot of technology. So, that's the one little thing I wanted to add.
Good.
Yeah, we definitely had to adjust a lot of things and invest some time trying to relearn some things because some of the tools that we used changed very quickly because they were trying to adjust as well. And sometimes you have to come up with different ways to do certain things because as language teachers we have our bag of tricks that we normally use. Where's my running dictation that I cannot do that anymore, or go from seat to seat finding people, or any of those things that we do that are very interactive and that again you have to move from your seat. And back then the restrictions were very intense. There were many things that the kids could not do, and even the way that our classes are arranged changed. They were in rows. We normally don't sit in rows in my school. We arrange them in any way we want, and sometimes we have pods. I usually have circles. All those things had to be completely changed, and that meant like all the things again that we are used to doing in a classroom, because we were still in the classroom, but it was not the same. One, because of the setup in the classroom, but also you also had the students at home at the same time. So that was tiring. It's a lot of multitasking, I think, and teachers are very good at multitasking, but that was like another level of like doing things at the same time. And then it also involves making sure that first as the pandemic kept evolving, the number of, and then the vaccines became available, the number of students then that were at home changed. We had to change that same. We changed again our program in that way. So, but we still had a fewer number of students at home that stayed remote for the rest of the school year. But still, you have to have systems in place to make sure that everybody's served as they should. So yeah, that was exhausting. It was tiring, and again, you had to reinvent some of the things, and some of the things that you had to start using, for example, ways for making sure that everybody is understanding something. And that's when, for example, Pear Deck for me, actually, I had not used that before, and I had some colleagues that had used it, some friends, and I thought like that was a very good way because we already had something. So one of the things that I think we tried to do was to use what you have already and how can we adjust it to what we have. So if we had PowerPoints that we already use, then that tool, for example, allowed us to continue to use them, but change them slightly so that they could be used remotely without reinventing the wheel, and still keep a level of engagement that is consistent with a language classroom, and the students are able to do at least once or twice in the classroom, do the different modes of communication. They are able to interact with each other, or do a reading comprehension or listening comprehension, for example. That's when Edpuzzle came in through for us too as well, and we started to use it. I had never used that before, and I found it very useful. But again, it was like quick learning curve for us to to get to use it, use new tools. And again, some of them I just stuck to only a couple more, and I tried to use them, and it did involve some time. Also, there was a lot of work that was submitted digitally, and the kind of feedback that we had to give was a little bit different as well. So we spent more time, I think, than we were used to looking at a screen ourselves and checking things digitally, and that's definitely one of the difficulties, I think, like spending too much time on the screen for everybody, and because of that too, also our school in the schedule, 1 day a week was actually a day where we didn't have regular instruction, and we all were completely remote, and some things happen asynchronously, and that was also a time to just meet with your teachers or just be off the screen for most of the day, which was very helpful. We kept that through the whole school year. All Wednesdays, for example, for us were like that, and I thought that was very thoughtful, and it was really helpful because that really kind of like that day in the middle of the week helped us deal with all that extra time that we were spending during the week, and to devote it to either away from the screens or doing something a little bit different for the students and for us too.
Oh, that was great. And actually segues into another thing I wanted to ask is, let's talk a little bit about your students' experience. From what you could tell, did they thrive? Did they do well in the HyFlex environment? And you could look at it in terms of their demeanor, their energy level, but also just what you were able to gather in terms of, did they meet the educational goals and objectives and learning outcomes? Did they improve in all 4 skills, for example? How did it go from your students' perspective, to the extent that you guys could tell?
I can, I guess, go if you want.
Sure.
For my students, it kind of depended on which level. So some of my levels, they thrived and they did well, and they were on top of it, and they did what they needed to do. At my lower levels, my level 1 and my level 2 classes, they struggled a little bit more. It was hard to get them to turn on their cameras when they were at home, or if they did, I got to see their ceiling instead of getting to see them, and getting them to turn in work. Sometimes that was a struggle. But I made sure I gave them plenty of time in class to work on anything. And sometimes that required a lot of communication with parents to help motivate them to get the work done. I had to meet a lot of their social emotional learning needs as well. And so every day I would have a daily check-in just to kind of see how they're all doing. And for me, that was sometimes the most important aspect that I could get sometimes that day, because some days some kids weren't having it because too many things were happening in their lives. And so I had to realize that sometimes that, I got to step back a little bit with my language and kind of meet those first needs first. So.
That makes sense. Yep.
Yeah, I can go next. I think what Luis was saying really struck me, and that is, how do you deal with students who have had an experience where they are doing interactive things around the classroom, looking at each other and, having that personal experience, shifting entirely to a screen and looking out, for me personally, looking out at a sea of screens, and then trying to engage the people who are on the other screen from in a different time zone. I had the benefit of working with adults. So in a lot of ways, they knew and could have a sense that all things come to an end. And so they were flexible in working with me, and they continued to support the people who were in different time zones, or, they felt grateful that they got to have. I mentioned the group of Kazakhs, and then they got this diversity that came in from the people who were from Asia. So I think they appreciated and even helped me sometimes when someone would write something in a chat box and I didn't see it, or someone had their hand up and I didn't see it. So they encouraged each other to work with the system. So that was really helpful. Or, I'm so jealous of the omnidirectional microphone. Or they'd say, oh, remember the microphone's right there. So a person that was maybe soft spoken would sit next to the microphone, and someone that had a louder voice would sit further away. So I feel like they, in terms of energy, I'll just say one or two more things. They're used to learning experientially. So there were no in-person field trips. We did have some guest speakers come in, but most of them were guest speakers who were also remote. So we were looking at them on a screen as well, even though many of the people were in person, and that guest speaker could have been in person as well. I feel like they, some of them, as Shirley said, some of them are lower level. And so just getting them to use the technology well, or getting them to use the apps well, and the transition time with instructions, those kinds of things were really challenging for them. And they got frustrated waiting for other people to learn it, or me to learn it. I think I have more things to say, but I want to give other people a chance, and I'm sure we'll come back to students and their experience as well. So,
okay, great. Luis, did you want to have any additional thoughts on this one? How the students thrived or not?
We learned a few things, and definitely we realized the importance, at least with the age group that we teach, of the importance of being together in person, and how that makes things very different. It makes a difference when it comes to a language classroom. Many students were able to, follow the program and do very well, and others really needed the personal interaction. I think most did, and I think that's why this year we decided to just keep it fully in person. That was definitely a big I wish that I would have taken advantage of some opportunities, for example, to connect the students with the global community, but we were so overwhelmed with screens and Zooms that I think that there wasn't much of an opportunity that could have been well used anyway. And I think in the way in which we're doing things right now, it's more likely, I think, to take advantage of those opportunities for being a little more of a novelty, and also have the students together interacting, and maybe interacting with somebody on a screen as well, but being constantly, definitely in front of a screen is a little bit difficult. And I think because of that too, we even allowed sometimes to do some work asynchronously, as probably most of you did, which did help, and try to do things even like with pencil and pen, by hand as well, and try to, and then you can submit them, but it was mostly spending time away from a screen, which we started to, as we learned how that was affecting everyone, we started to say that. So again, did students thrive? Many of them did, but I think also many of them were just looking forward to coming back in person and trying to do the communication that we normally do in person. I think it's especially for the age group, as you say, with adults it's a different, but even for adults sometimes is you really I think thrive when you have interactions with others that are in person. So any system in which you can probably do both would be ideal. But I think with the age group we have, I think we're in a much happier place right now.
Great. So as we start to wind down a little bit, I've got more or less two questions that I wanted to make sure we got to. One being just kind of, what any other thoughts to share. But before we get to just some final closing thoughts, just kind of a thought experiment here. Some have said that this is what we've been building to, that this is eventually going to be the new normal, that it will be learning from anywhere. If devices will not be it'll be sort of the water in the aquarium that the fish don't see, but they're in the aquarium, that the technology that we have now, the bandwidth that we now have in most cases will allow us to do this. So if you were told by your institution that moving forward, you're going to have some students in person synchronously, and you're going to have some students synchronously or asynchronously at some distance, and the technology will be there, and you'll be expected to essentially have them all interacting and you interact with them. What would it take to make that work? And you might want to think about, Luis, you had talked about some of the, having the extra iPad that in the front of the room that could serve as the camera and so forth and so on. What would it really take to make this work? And anyone jump in, please.
Well, I think what it would take is that you would have to be able to have all the technology that you could possibly need at the different locations, and have people at the various locations know what they're doing with the technology. Because I can tell you, the Jigsaw program that I used one year, I was using that the beginning of this year, and there were several people who did not know how to use it with the headsets and that kind of thing. And I wasn't there in person to kind of help walk them through. So then I had to switch to Zoom because they're like, I can't hear you, I can't hear you. And so that posed a problem because I'm trying to get them to understand what I'm trying to say, and they're not hearing what I'm saying. So it's like, so definitely if there's like people around to help, and sometimes you don't know the right question to ask to get the technology to work the right way. And so that was a nice learning experience for me for this year, because I was like, oh, it worked so perfectly last year, I'm just going to use it again this year. And then finally it took a whole 9 weeks before they actually spoke up to tell me that they couldn't hear me. So it's like, okay, like I don't know how to make that better unless you tell me. So that was a huge learning curve for me.
I definitely agree that it's important to have a good team of people that helps you and resources available. I think I felt very lucky to have them, and also as me being involved with Wattful, having the other people being very generous with their resources when it comes to at least ideas, I think is very important to. In the organization, we started this YouTube channel called Wattful Tips, where people just gave ideas on things they wanted to share. For example, one of them was talking about, what do I do with this activity that I always do all the time? How do I turn this into an activity that could be done virtually? And a popular one was El Matamosca, the
Fly swatter.
And how could you do that virtually? And I think one of the teachers actually recorded a short video, and this is how you can do it with Google Slides. And it was interesting to see how people just like, oh, that's a great idea, I'll do that. So sometimes you have the technology to do it, and again, a good kind of like motto or mantra for us was use what you have in a way and try to learn how to use it well. But at the same time, it's good to have people who think about exactly what is the user experience, what do our children, the students that we teach, need. And based on, again, as you said before, and some research, I think I definitely think that paying attention to or making informed decisions when it comes to mind-brain education science, and see what would be beneficial for a student or not, or for the teachers, on how would a student learn best. Making those decisions when it comes to, it's not just the technology. You can have a wonderful big screen with lots of cameras, and it may not necessarily be exactly what your students need for the program. So again, it's more than just the of course the technology really helps, and of course omnidirectional microphone saved my voice, but at the same time, and may also ease the frustration of students who would have otherwise not hear what was going on that well in the classroom. It still wasn't perfect, but it made it a lot easier if it wasn't for those, those decisions that were made. But again, keeping in mind what the students need, and not just in terms of like as you said, how would a student thrive here? What would be the best solution? So keeping in mind what the social or emotional impact is going to be of this technology, what are they going to learn better or not with this? Is this going to help? And then in terms of like things again like schedule, what would be a good schedule? Does it really matter if we do it synchronously every single day for an hour on Zoom every single session? Maybe just some of them. Maybe it would be great to also meet each other if there is a program that is online or hybrid. When would you meet and how often in person? If eventually you would provide that, or how much synchronous is necessary, or how much asynchronous is necessary. I think those questions will depend, I think, mostly on the population you teach and what their needs are. And I think paying attention to all those things when it comes to the decisions of technology and, again, teaching practices will definitely inform what will be the best for your students.
And I think, Susan, I'll give you in just a second, but just one thought there is, we cannot assume that all students have lots of bandwidth, great computing capacity at home. Know that there aren't 2 or 3 siblings who are also trying to learn at the same time in the same room with few devices. These are all things that those have to be in place for it to work. So in any event, Susan?
Yeah, that's a good point, Jeff. And I have to say that the majority of the students that I had did have the means to have good technology and a good, strong bandwidth as well. So I know that is a privilege that we enjoyed and had. But I really like, Shirley talking about how she used a certain technology and then she almost expected or wanted to be able to trust that other teachers might be familiar with it too. And so I think if we have, like we have with Blackboard, if we have a shared knowledge as instructors of certain technology, we don't all have to use Jamboard if we don't like it, but there's certain technology that if I'm going to write a substitute plan, I have to assume that the teachers are going to take over for me, know how to use Zoom, know how to use Blackboard, know how to use, some of the general, like Google, to be able to keep a running doc, a live running doc with the students. So, that would be something, is just being able to trust that all of us are getting some basic training as instructors. And then that the students have, the access that they need as well. But then there were other things that, and Luis, you having that I'm writing tips down, and I really hope that you guys, if we can, I've been trying to catch and, phonetically write some of the apps you guys are mentioning. So if we can have some kind of running list of the apps you've mentioned, I'd like to look into them. But I feel like what you said, Luis, too, made me think about students need to have some of that social emotional learning. And I used my office hours more than I ever had to make sure that I could have connections with students. That it sounds like, Shirley, every day I'm just so in awe of you that you could meet with your students every day. But I think I'd love for our administration to be able to put that into the contract, that we actually spend time with our students, because it always felt to me when I had to do extra time above and beyond that, of course we do this and we're drawn to it as teachers, but I feel like if that could be an acknowledgement that students need more one-on-one time with us if it's going to be a remote experience that they have. And I agree, Jeff, I don't think this is going away. And I think that's a good thing. Let's invite this in, especially for my industry. How do we get people on different time zones who can't leave their country or their jobs? Maybe they can be with us in the evening when they couldn't have come otherwise. So I like the idea. And the final thing that I'll say that really helped me was having every student have access to an online textbook, because I had some of them that really love paper, which I understand Luis, you talked about some assignments being handwritten, and I think there is a place for that, and I'd like to keep that. But when they're trying to do group work and one student is trying to hold their book up to the screen to show, well, I put this answer, what did you put? It was really useful for them all to have ebooks.
Oh, very good. Real quick, just the ones that I caught during our conversation in terms of apps: Pear Deck, Flipgrid, Jigsaw was one, Blackbaud as a learning management system as opposed to Blackboard, which was also used. Was there anything else that you all remember coming up?
I mentioned Edpuzzle, and for example, the chat. The chat option in the Zoom doesn't always work very well when you are in person and at the same time to have students at home. It's not easy to be seeing what's going on and you miss it. So that's when Padlet became very useful as well.
Mm-hmm.
And they also have been adding a few things, and I just learned that there are a few things that I'm interested in actually checking out right now. They have new modes where students can actually interact and put images and things like that too. So I think that's definitely one. And Pear Deck, I mentioned Pear Deck, and then Padlet became very, very, very useful. And again, because students have the phones in their hands and because they have iPads, going back to what you were saying before about how do you get your piece of paper and show it, I mean, taking a picture of it and then sharing it on the screen became a very, or putting it on the Padlet, which is like a bulletin board, and they can even reply to each other's posting. So, and they can put pictures and more things. So that helped a little bit with that kind of what aspect. I mean, trying to not have everything completely on the screen, but sometimes on paper. We even turn off the screen. Sometimes it's like, we're going to turn this off right now, and you're going to work.
Louise, could I ask you? Sorry to interrupt. Could I ask you to is it Pear Date, PAIR?
It's
Pear Deck.
Pear Deck.
Oh, Pear
Pear
Deck.
Deck. Pear as in the fruit, deck.
Okay.
Pear Deck. It's an extension that you use for Google Slides and also for PowerPoint, and it allows you to, as you have your PowerPoint that you already may have or that you create, it allows some interactivity with it. So you can stop there, and if you let's say you're having a lecture or anything that the PowerPoint had, then you can stop it at some point and add some interactivity, and students in the classroom, in person and at home or wherever, they could answer questions and you can get data immediately, and it could be anonymous or not. There's a number of things that you can do with it.
I'd just like to add that I used Perusall to pretty good effect, and that's PERUSALL, and it helps students, especially with annotation, but also respond to listening passages, or even my assignment. I would post that, and then they could add and interact with it with comments.
I also have a few that have not been mentioned, but they were amazing to get the kids to interact. Everything from, there's a thing called Charlala. It's CHARLALA, and it's a nice program to help with speaking. And then I also used there's so many of them. I'm trying to think of them all because I think I subscribe to everything.
Right.
But I use WordWall for like interactive games, and I have Breakout EDU so that way the kids can do reading comprehension and grammar through interaction, like with the breakout room. And then I also used a thing called Miro that allowed for like interaction. 1 second, let me talk to my kids for.
While she's doing that, let me just put in a very shameless plug for Malt. We're going to organize a tech slam, probably in April. So, 5 minutes of demonstrations of various solutions and apps and so forth. So look for that. We'll publicize that through Malt's listserv and IALLT. And of course, I'll tell you guys since I'm connected to you personally. Okay, Shirley, sorry.
Oh, no problem. So then there's a thing called Parlay. Parlay was an amazing program that you can get, and it furthers discussion and analytical thought. So you give the kids an opportunity to work through the material. And then there's
sorry, Shirley, is that PARLEZ?
PARLEY.
Oh.
PARLAY.
EY. EY.
Okay.
Yeah. And then there's also whiteboard.fi. That was great. So you can have the kids show their whiteboards all at the same time with whatever the content would be. So, and those are just some of the many, many, many things that I use.
Wonderful. All right. So just because we've gone a little long, but this has been a fascinating conversation, and I'm sure that our viewers who've stuck with us now, we're very appreciative to have these tips of these particular apps and solutions and how you use them. So any final thoughts? And in particular, were there certain challenges that you encountered with HyFlex that you didn't anticipate? So that, or just general advice for someone who may be thrown into this world?
One of the things I could say is that it was wonderful to communicate with colleagues, because when you're a Latin teacher, you're usually a classroom of one. And so finally, I got several of the Latin teachers together, and we actually planned. And so when we first started planning, it would take us 6 hours to do 4 levels. And now we continued this process. So every Saturday we get together, and we can now do a whole week's worth of planning in about an hour and a half for 3 levels. So so we got it down to a science, and it saved my time quite considerably. It took a while to kind of figure out, because everyone wanted to do their own thing. But once we realized we can't do that. We need to divide and conquer. And so that was probably the most beneficial and time management saving that I could ever have.
Very good.
Yeah, I would just second that. And like Shirley did, we had some teachers, if we were all teaching the same kinds of materials, let's say cross-cultural communication, then one of us would make up a Quizlet and then copy it for another class. And maybe you can just adjust the slides and add in the names of your students, and it, all of a sudden becomes fun and new to them. So really relying on my colleagues and enjoying the experience, because we all were doing stuff digitally so much. We could share much more than in the past when we were using things that weren't so, wasn't so capable, wasn't so easy to share.
Yeah, I was a little bit surprised too that how much sometimes you get carried away, because it's important to, I think, separate or to actually put a limit of how much time you're going to be spending on the screen, because your work is in front of you constantly, and it's really difficult to stop. At some point, it's okay, it's 7, 8, and when am I going to stop? So it's good to put limits, I think, and I think I was very thankful again that we had a system in the school where we could actually stop at a certain time and pay attention to the emotional well-being of the teachers and the students, I think was very important. And I was very, very, very thankful of the support that colleagues did with each other and school, and having this network of teachers sharing things, as you said, that was amazing. I mean, just to see how everybody just pitches in to say, what can I use for this? I don't know what to do, or how can I make this more efficient? And I think how the generosity of people just really was amazing. How people just share, teachers just share everything, put everything out there for people to use it. So I think that was quite nice to see, and still happening. And we, of course, got some lessons from that we still are going to continue to use.
Great. All right. Well, thank you again to Susan Berry, Shirley Hall, and Luis Deocares for this interview. This has been an interview for the FLT Mag, which is a publication of IALLT. You can find us at IALLT.org and FLTmag.com. Thank you all once again, and I look forward to talking to you soon. Take care.
Thank you, Susan.
All right. Bye, everyone.